Teenagers killed after running from police in a truck and crashing. Tonight, we're on your side investigating if police should have ever been chasing them in the first place. We've been on your side working to get answers ever since this crash late last week. Thanks for staying with us live at 5. I'm Siobhan Bryan.
And I'm John Carter. And Mooresville police tell WBTV it originally started as a speeding violation that turned into a chase that crossed into Rowan County. That's where the teenagers crashed and died.
WBTV's Lowell Rose is live from Mooresville Police Department. Lowell, you went and got your hands on the police department policy about pursuits. What have you uncovered?
Well, I can tell you this pursuit policy right here outlines the standards officers here in Mooresville must abide by if there is a pursuit that starts here in the town limits. Now, WBTV requested these documents after that deadly crash Thursday night.
There are sometimes unintended consequences that may arise to other people that may have nothing to do with the actual chase.
Through a request for the Mooresville pursuit policy, I found the documents provide a guideline for officers when a pursuit happens. Unlike some localities, pursuits are allowed in Mooresville, but there are a lot of responsibilities on the officers. I talked to an attorney about the pursuit policy. Brad Smith is not connected to this particular case, but did provide me with some insight.
The difficult decision they really have is they have to balance the need to show a fleeing suspect that flight from the law is not the best way to freedom.
Throughout the pursuit, officers must constantly balance the need to pursue against all known risks for the public, officers, and the person they're pursuing. Officers are also authorized to engage and continue a pursuit when the driver is or has committed a crime dangerous to life, or if not arresting the driver presents another harm. And pursuing officers must communicate with a supervisor during the entire incident.
If some sort of accident, fatality, or injury results from a high-speed chase, which are in their very nature dangerous, that our courts have said that the police agencies or the officers that are doing the chase are only negligent or only liable if they're grossly negligent.
According to the pursuit policy and the information we currently have about the deadly chase, it doesn't appear protocol was broken in this incident.
And we do know that North Carolina Highway Patrol is investigating the collision that happened with these teenagers losing control in that crash. Now, the legal expert that I talked to today tell me that the Highway Patrol investigation could shed more lights on what led up to this deadly crash and ultimately the goals between, well, I can tell you the things happen between police and the actions by the teenagers, but we'll be waiting for that full investigation and report from Highway Patrol reporting here in Mooresville. Lowell Rose, WBTV, on your side.
All right, Lowell, thank you so much. John?
Well, turning now to your first alert forecast.